The top-ranked Georgia Bulldogs faced off against the formidable Clemson Tigers. The first half, a grueling battle. A relentless exchange of punts and a couple of field goals. With only 6 points on the board, the tension was palpable.
Play fake by Cade Klubnik. They have 23 yards of offense so far. Deep throw and a catch. A beautiful catch by Antonio Williams.
But as the second half began, the game's pulse quickened.
For a touchdown. Into the end zone. London Humphreys down the sideline and into the end zone.
Georgia breaks free with a series of explosive plays, from a powerful touchdown to a game-changing interception.
Lets it go deep, and it is intercepted by the All-American Malachi Starks.
In the end, the Bulldogs surged past the Tigers 34-3, leaving Dabo and company to pick up the pieces and regroup as they move on to a capable Appalachian State team next week in Death Valley.
So I admire his courage. But right here, buddy, that's a tattoo.
Wow, that's David Dunham.
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 2 of the Nachos Analysis College Football Show. I'm Drew Archer, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Matthew Johnson. How's it going, Matthew?
It is going great, Drew. I'm happy to be here for week 2. Hopefully all of our technical difficulties from last week are resolved, and this one comes out smoothly.
Yeah, we apologize for any audio issues, any video issues from last week. We've had our handful of them here the last couple of days trying to record this, but college football is back, Matthew. Right off the bat, let's just talk about some other games because we don't necessarily have to touch on this Clemson-Georgia game right off the bat if you're not feeling it. I have a couple games on here. I don't know how much football you had the chance to watch this weekend, but what was one of your favorite games you watched this week?
I would say my game of the week, it's between two. One of them is kind of a surprise, but first I would say USC-LSU. On Sunday night, that game was electric. Possibly game of the week, but USC came out strong and looked really fast and physical. And as the game wore on, LSU kind of seemed to level up to that level of play and kind of match that a little bit. But USC was very impressive. They looked fast, and it's a good win for USC. But also the loss could not have happened to a more deserving school.
You mentioned the physicality of Southern California. That's been a knock on Lincoln Riley, his defenses over the years, and I was pleasantly surprised with how physical his defense played in that game. There's a lot of good games that happened this weekend. We'll touch on some of them. Miami goes into Gainesville and defeats Florida. They embarrass Florida 41-17. Billy Napier gets embarrassed on the field, gets embarrassed in the post-game press conference. He's struggling with a bottle cap, can't get his water bottle open. Virginia Tech, Vanderbilt. When you threw this pick out last week, I was like, there's no way that Vanderbilt's covering this spread, and Vanderbilt gets a home win, not only covering the spread, but winning outright.
Yeah, this was what I was referencing when I said I have two possible games of the week. The second one I was going to mention is this Virginia Tech Vandy game. It was great to watch. If anybody missed it, Vandy got to like the 35-yard line with 30 seconds left in the fourth quarter in a tie ball game, and then they just let the clock run down and decided to kick the field goal from there. And then as time expires, they kicked and missed, and the game went into overtime. And then I believe it was only one overtime. Vandy scored a touchdown, and then they made the stop on defense. But I did want to also point out, I'm not sure his first name, but the quarterback for Virginia Tech, Drones, he is really good. I wish, where are these type of players in Clemson's recruiting classes? I don't know, because it seems like they all go to these other schools, and then they go play electric football. But we have the higher ranked, recruited guys, and then they come and do nothing.
Yeah, your last two quarterbacks come in as highly touted 5-star guys and have not performed as such. And then you look around the country, and there's a lot of good quarterbacks out there right now.
Yeah, it's hard to watch quarterback play across the nation and not feel like you're missing out as a Clemson fan.
Yeah. Notre Dame, Texas A&M. Notre Dame goes into Kyle Field, gets out with a 10-point victory. They defeat the Aggies 23-13. A game that I was kind of really into with how close it was. Old Dominion, South Carolina. South Carolina ends up pulling it out in the end, but they do struggle with Old Dominion. South Carolina wins that one 23-19. You mentioned the USC LSU game. USC wins that one by 10 points. And then last night's game, Boston College versus Florida State. Florida State has not only pretty much played themselves out of playoff contention, as they're about out of ACC contention, which I know if you win your conference, you are eligible for the playoff. But the Seminoles starting the season out 0-2.
That's not something I was expecting this year, and I don't think a lot of people were expecting that. But watching how Florida State operates, and I think we talked about this last week, but it's just this, every offensive coordinator DJ has played for, they handle him the same way. And that just limits the playbook, then the defense pretty much knows what you're going to do. And they can just ride home and make plays as much as they want. But still forget his first name, but Castellanos, the quarterback for Boston College, I talked about him last year. He's a great player, and I'm not sure. Do we play Boston College this year? Because I'm scared of him.
Let's see. We do not play Boston College this year.
We escaped one there.
We escaped both Boston College and Georgia Tech this season. Florida State's 2 losses so far. But yeah, he could get that edge real quick. And for the biggest disappointment, I think, with Florida State is how hyped up and skilled their defensive front is and their defense is in general. Anytime he wanted to get the edge, he could take it and break for a 10-plus yard run. They could not stop him to save their life last night.
Well, that's the thing about when Clemson and Florida State end up playing, is we don't have that speed on our team to get to the edge. So I really like how Castellanos plays, though. It's almost like a little Kyler Murray-esque.
Yeah. So before we get into anything else, we have to shout out our loyal sponsor. If you've been listening to us for any amount of time, you know that is Pump Monkey Septic Service. Pump Monkey Septic Service is owned and operated by Clemson alumni Alan Powell, and he lives and operates and services the upstate of South Carolina, anywhere from Clemson to Seneca to even all the way out in Simpsonville. I've seen the Pump Monkey truck all over. You can give them a call at 864-710-2211. They're on Facebook and Instagram. So give Alan Powell, a Clemson alumni, a call to let him come and check out your septic tank. Again, that phone number is 864-710-2211. When the dump's funky, call Pump Monkey. Matthew, I guess it's time to talk about this Georgia game.
Unfortunately, there were a couple bright spots, though, so I'll let you take those away.
Yeah, let me just throw out some stats real quick. Antonio Williams led the team with 6 receptions for 76 yards on Saturday. Phil Maffa, 59 yards on 16 carries. Freshman Bryant Westco Jr. and TJ Moore also recorded 1 reception each in their college debut. Peter Woods recorded a career-high 2.5 tackles for a loss. He led the team. He had the first sack of the 2024 season. He's also the first player to have 2.5 tackles for a loss since last season against Notre Dame. Jeremiah Trotter recorded that. Wade Woodaz was credited with a team high and a career high 8 tackles. True freshman Nolan Hauser made his first career field goal, 26-yarder, Clemson's only points of the day. Clemson drops to 12-4 in openers under Dabo Swinney. So those are some of the stats from the game. As far as my thoughts, positives. We'll start positive, and then we'll digress. Offensive line, you can definitely see improvement. They held up pretty well under Matt Luke since he came in during the offseason. was very pleased, except for that one video that went around. I think your dad sent in our group message. I didn't pay attention to who the two linemen were that just turned around and blocked each other. Both tried to pull the opposite direction. And for the most part, for the first 3 quarters, the defense played really well. They were not going to allow Georgia to run up the middle. But as the snowball began to build after so much time on the field, offensive production not being what it needed to be, the defense did end up giving up quite a few touchdowns there at the end. I thought Cade Klubnik looked pretty good, better, improved. More of a game manager type thing. He had some bad throws, so a couple bad decisions. I don't necessarily 100% put the interception that he threw on him as well. I think if you threw it a split second earlier, you might not have had a pick there, but that was just a great play by that DB there. After a couple early mistakes, Bernie Stool bounced back and had an amazing catch. I believe that was in the second half he made that one-handed catch. And then Phil Maffa had a great game up the middle, and you kind of wish you would have saw a little bit more of that. Any thoughts on that, Matthew?
Yeah, so after the very first offensive play of the game for Clemson, where we tried to run that little rollout and dump it off to the running back, and Cade threw it in the dirt instead of, the 4 yards the ball needed to travel, I started like a bad pass counter. But to Cade's credit, I didn't want to be biased, so I gave him a great throw counter too. So we'll go through the great throws. I only won in the first half, and it is probably Clemson's offensive highlight of the game, aside from that one-handed catch you mentioned from Brittingstool. But it's that corner route that was 36 yards to Antonio Williams. Ball was placed perfectly. It was great coverage. He was all over him, and Antonio Williams ran a great route and made the great contested catch. So that was the first good throw of the game. I didn't get another great throw of the game until the second half, which is that play that you mentioned. Threw it into Brittingstool, and I believe he was covered, but Brittingstool throws one hand up there and brings it down. And there was a roughing the passer call on that same play that added 15. So that was like a net almost 40 yards on that play, which is like, half the offense that we did in the first half. Also in the second half, we did like a little fake toss rollout and then hit Brittingstool in the flat. But this was a really good throw to me because Cade had to layer this throw, get it over 2 defenders, and then Brittingstool was kind of about 5 or 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. And so you had to get it over those first 2 and then down into where Brittingstool is. That was a really good play. Then later in the second half, we had a 1st and 10 corner route by Tyler Brown. It was another really good throw. I think Cade really focused on those outside throws this year, and hopefully that's going to make our offense more productive. And then the bad thing is right after that 1st and 10 throw that I was mentioning, he threw the pick on the very next play. We'll get to these 2 bad throws, but he had 2 bad throws in a row. And then I believe it's on 3rd down. He escapes pocket under pressure and throws a really nice fastball to TJ Moore for a 1st down. And that was, something we didn't always get out of Cade. But moving on to the bad pass counter. I mentioned the first play of the game, the rollout dump off. It was 3 yards and couldn't make it complete. I think Dabo even came out in his press conference today and said that if that one's caught or if that's a good ball, then that's a 30-yard gain for the first play. And think of how just the momentum of the game changes. We didn't get a 30-yard play until the second quarter. Second bad throw of the game, it was a 2nd and 3. We took a deep shot, which I don't hate that call. It's 2nd and short. Yeah, that's a chance to throw a deep ball. The things I don't like about it is we threw it to Cole Turner and into double coverage, and Cole Turner didn't even see the ball or think he was getting the ball and stopped running the route. So that's kind of both on Cade and Cole Turner. Then
on that one real quick,
yeah.
I can't remember if you have this as one of your bad throws or not. I don't think you do. But on Turner letting up on that route and maybe not seeing it. Also, in the corner of the end zone later in the game, maybe the 3rd quarter, there was a beautiful pass by Cade in the corner of the end zone, and Antonio Williams almost spun around in a circle trying to find it. I'm wondering if maybe just the dome or something. Maybe their just line of sight was maybe messed up. I definitely think at least with the one on Antonio Williams, maybe not necessarily the Cole Turner, because he definitely did let up running, which almost turned into a pick.
Yeah, exactly. Like Cade got lucky. Like you said, that only interception he threw was a great play by the DB, but there was a couple other throws that could have been picked off in this game. But the very next play after that Cole Turner deep shot, I can't remember exactly the route Randall was running, but I think it was like a fade. He got pressed off the line, and Cade underthrew it by about 2 or 3 yards, and that leads to a 4th down and a punt. Next bad throw, another one to Cole Turner. This one, it wasn't until the 4th quarter, so I feel like Cade did play pretty well and above standard for him. But this one, 2nd and 22, an out route, just a simple out route to Cole Turner. Cade did throw the ball a little high, but it still hit Cole Turner in the hands, so I think that still needs to be a catch. It wasn't a great throw, though. Next, we have a 1st and 10 wheel, like fade concept by Tyler Brown. This is the interception play. It was blanket coverage, great interception by that DB, but you saw the safety coming over on that play also, and you had the guy playing underneath man. I don't think that's a great decision to throw that deep shot. 2 more, and then I'll be done. We had the rollout fade to Tyler Brown in the 4th quarter, and we didn't really start getting Tyler Brown involved in the game until really late, which was surprising. I really expected him to, try to force feed him in the beginning of the game. This throw was under pressure, but it was way underthrown again, like 3 to 4 yards and incomplete. And then the very next play after that, Cole Turner on a go route, another 3 to 4 yards underthrown, but we get bailed out that time with a defensive pass interference and get a 1st down. Not anything like based off of the quarterback or anything we did.
Yeah.
There was also 2 drops in the game. Brittingstall had one early on like a little curl route in the middle of the defense. That could have been a 1st down on that first drive. And then Cole Turner had that one I mentioned earlier where that ball was a little high but hit him in the hands. So I was impressed. I was expecting more drops, to be honest, out of this team. And Cade's, he's hit or miss, but I think overall he showed a lot of improvement this game. And we can't really like chalk up our entire season to what happened against Georgia.
Yeah. I mean, you were playing the number 1 team. Granted, you had all off season to prepare, but as good as Clemson recruits, Georgia recruits better. And, yeah, no, I agree. I would have probably expected more drops, but then you take some of these underthrown passes. Maybe those would have potentially been drops had he got them there. Who knows?
Also, a couple other things I wanted to mention before we moved on. Penalties killed a lot of momentum early in the game. That's something Clemson hasn't been good at the last couple years, really, is just being a disciplined, good football team. And as long as I can remember really growing up, that was something that Clemson was good at and focused on and harped on in practice. So I don't know what changed there. We had 3 penalties in the first 4 drives. I mentioned earlier we only had 76 yards at halftime and 2 first downs. UGA seemed to have made halftime adjustments and stopped running in between the tackles right at Peter Woods and DeMonte Capehart. I don't think Clemson made any second half adjustments other than trying to get Tyler Brown the ball.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing that jumped out because he was non-existent in the first half. You talk about those penalties, those 2 on the first drive. Like, I was shocked when Clemson decided they wanted the ball first.
Yeah,
which lets you know they thought they had a good game plan, a good scripted first drive, and then you combine the procedural penalties and the poor throw in the first play by Cade, and it just stalls out that drive. And then going into halftime, Georgia's got a 6-0 lead. They're getting a little bit of momentum, and then they get the ball to start the second half, and it was on after that.
Yeah, but defensively, especially that first half, like you mentioned, I think we had a great game plan going. DeMonte Capehart is one person that I've seen him getting love, but not as much as like Peter Woods and a couple other defenders, but shout out to DeMonte Capehart. He had a great game, a couple tackles for loss. Yeah, and I know this was something that we talked about in last episode, like theorizing if this was going to happen. But on that first drive, I noticed UGA a lot. lining up in a formation, and then as the play clock hits 15 seconds, when they don't have headset communication with the coach, they make a check at the line and change formations. And I think that was definitely a strategy early on. That way you go out, line up, the coach can see what the defense is lining up in, and then you make your adjustment from there. So I'd like to see Clemson implement something like that, and I think we did to some extent, but just the more we can diagnose the defense, the better our offense is going to move. And lastly, I guess I'll shout out one more player and then say one other thing about this game, but then I'd never want to talk about it again. RJ Mickens, I think, had a really good game. I know we've been hard on him on this podcast in the past, but I think he's one of the defensive leaders this year, and he really stepped up and had a good game. And then this was my biggest thing that I saw while watching was just how different the athleticism is between UGA and Clemson. If you think like 6 years ago, Clemson's talent was competing in athleticism, was competing with everybody in the country. We never played a team maybe other than a Lamar Jackson led Louisville where we were like outmatched on speed. This one was very evident, and I think Georgia realized in the first half that they just can out athletic us and ended up running a lot of jet sweeps and bubble screens, plays to the outside. And that's what won the game. They started moving the ball efficiently after that happened.
Yeah, Clemson did not have the speed to protect the edge there on those jet sweeps. Another thing I wanted to point out, the timeout management in the first half.
Bad.
Our usage of timeouts was terrible. I was at the game, so I didn't necessarily could see what was going on. And talking with your dad when after the game was over, he was mentioning the one that drove me crazy was you put the offense back out there on fourth down to try to draw them off sides, but then you don't get lined up till like 6 seconds left on the play clock.
How are you going to hard count them with only 5 seconds on the clock?
Yeah. And then Cade turns around and calls a timeout. Evidently, this is your dad said from the broadcast that you could see Dabo getting on to him about he does not need to be calling the timeouts. Dabo's the one that's going to be calling the timeout. So I don't know, maybe the plan was just to take the 5-yard penalty there and save that timeout. I don't know, but there was definitely some communication issues there.
I actually saw in a post-game interview, Cade said that apparently the call was to like go out and hard count and then take the 5-yard penalty and punt, but Cade didn't get that memo, or I think maybe his instincts took over when he just saw the play clock at 0. But horrible clock management in the first half. We called all 3 timeouts. All of them were gone by 6.5 minutes left in the second quarter.
The only other thing I wanted to talk about, and this was probably one of the fan base's biggest gripes, was, and I went on a Georgia podcast this past week, Nothing's Finer podcast, shout out to them. But one of the things they asked me, they were asking about the young receiver talent that Clemson has, and I was a bit contrarian and said that I think that Clemson has a bunch of veteran receivers who have been unhealthy. You got them all back. They're all healthy. And despite this young talent, the veteran crew is going to be the ones that are going to be the consistent leaders and the ones you can depend on and that sort of thing as these young guys grow up. And we didn't see that. Adam Randall with just some boneheaded moves gets benched in the middle of the game. I mean, you had a great game out of Antonio Williams, Tyler Brown when we finally saw him in the second half. And one other thing, too, I know Cole Turner did not have a good game, but something I do want to point out, he burst onto the scenes at this ACC championship game a couple years ago against North Carolina. Prior to that, virtually no one knew of him. And then he spent most of last year hurt. And I think it's probably just a narrative coming out of camp, how Dabo brags about how fast he is and all this kind of stuff. But people were losing their minds over Cole Turner being in there when, if you look back to last season, people were all gassed up about Cole Turner after how they saw him perform in that ACC championship game. So I'd say pump the brakes on the hate on some of them, but it is a bit disappointing, some of these veteran guys that you thought after a few years in this program you'd be able to count on a little bit more than we did on Saturday.
Yeah, I will say about the Cole Turner thing, like, I understand what you were saying about, like, pumping the hate on him. This was, like, his second real game that he's played in 3 years. But, like, he didn't really look physically ready. He looked scared. He looked like what you'd expect somebody named Cole Turner to look like playing wide receiver against UGA. So I understand the hate, and obviously he's just a kid. Like, don't do anything stupid or talk to him or anything. But, like, I think Clemson's standard at wide receiver needs to be higher than Cole Turner getting the starting role.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how the rotation as far as wide receivers plays out here in the coming weeks. Antonio Williams obviously starting, I think. Tyler Brown is a starter this coming week. Or maybe not. Those are both. I don't have the depth chart in front of me. They did release it this week.
Yeah, I don't think there were any changes from last week's depth chart. So if Tyler Brown was as a starter, and Cole Turner, I think, is still listed as starters for week 2.
Okay.
But then I think John Blau, friend of the show, mentioned that Clemson almost never changes their depth chart from week 1 to 2 unless there's like a major injury. So
yeah.
Twitter polls.
All right, Twitter poll of the week. As always, we will post this each week, Monday, Tuesday-ish, depending on when I remember to post it. But as always, follow us at Nachos_analysis, where you can vote in it each week and get your voice heard. If you leave some comments, we'll read those here on air. This week's question, or this week's poll, was, what is Clemson's biggest offensive issue? If you took to Twitter or Tiger Illustrated or any kind of message board after the game was over, there was a lot to critique with this offense. So the options were quarterback, veteran wide receivers, general talent, and the coordinator position. Before Matthew and I give our responses, did want to shout out some of the listeners who got in and voted. Your dad was the top comment here, Matthew. Gerald J says, I chose QB, but answer is all of the above, or Dabo and his stubbornness. William Cockrell, who is a former Clemson player for Dabo, said E faced a top 3 defense in the country. He's a bit more optimistic. Tiger Talks says quarterback play paired with Grish's inability to develop receiver talent. Was pleased with Riley's creativity yesterday, especially in the first half. Lots of new formations and incorporating pre-snap motion. Unfortunately, our players are just not good enough. Will Smith, not the Will Smith that slapped Chris Rock, but the white version.
That's what he's known
for.
Will
Smith says, we need to have an other option. Starting to think Dabo has been a little too hands-on with the offense. I think he's still got Riley on a short leash. Dabo is the only common denominator in the offense, looking predictable and conservative since Scott and Elliott left. He needs to go back to being CEO. Jeffrey Lippick gets in and says, in my honest opinion, a lot of the problems can be traced back to misevaluations of key recruits, i.e. quarterbacks, receivers, over the last few years, and I think some of it can be blamed on COVID as well. I have seen that. There were a lot of highly touted recruits, especially at the quarterback position in the class that Cade Klubnik came up through. None of those quarterbacks have really wowed anybody. And then the last one we got from their literal Twitter handle is Dash, says veteran receivers are not playmakers. So, Matthew, what are your thoughts here? Quarterbacks, veteran wide receivers, general talent, or coordinators?
Well, first, I want to shout out to everybody who responded. That was a lot of responses. I wasn't expecting so many. So that's an interesting point about the COVID recruiting that I haven't really taken into consideration yet. I mean, obviously other teams are still getting hits on their recruits and such, but it makes me want to give the staff a little bit more slack on the recruiting, because I'm sure recruiting during COVID was not easy, and like where high schools might not have even been playing football. Some of them, playing against shortened schedules, different competition. Like, it's probably a lot harder during those 2020 recruiting classes to get data on those players. So that's a really good point, and I like that was pointed out. For my personal opinion, I voted for quarterback. And I said already this episode that I think Cade played a pretty good game. There's obviously mistakes that he made, but I said last week that you can't expect that big of differences between last year and this year for Cade. Like, I want him to just make steady improvements. But the reason why I chose quarterback is because Cade was the number 1 ranked dual threat quarterback coming out of high school. But against this UGA defense, he looked unathletic and slow. And even when he tried to escape the pocket, he was usually pretty easily contained. But obviously, receivers haven't helped him out very much. And that kind of made me want to bring up this one point that's a little off topic, but if you saw how Bo Collins performed these first couple weeks, or as a Notre Dame wide receiver, that's the same guy who was here for 3 years. All that's different is he has Chancey Stuckey teaching him receiving now instead of Tyler Grisham.
Yeah, no, he had himself a game the other night.
And that one catch, he had one catch on the sideline that was contested, and he just looked like a dominant receiver on that play. We got that maybe once or twice out of Bo Collins here.
Yeah. I went with veteran wide receiver talent. Touched on it already, but you've had a lot of guys that have been in this system for a long time that know Garrett Riley, that are familiar with Cade. You've had an entire offseason of being healthy, and a physical specimen like Adam Randall, who has the speed and the talent and can't put it together mentally and physically at the same time, is quite disappointing. So I went with the veteran wide receiver group there. The way the poll shook out, general talent finished with 19%. Coordinator got 21% of the vote. Veteran wide receiver 27%, and 33% of people agree with you as quarterback. Matthew.
I did want to, before we move on to Fact or Fiction, you've mentioned a couple times this episode about Adam Randall, and that is one of the most disappointing ones because he was a recruit that coming in was supposed to be a dominant, strong, physical receiver. We have yet to get that. All we got from him out during the Georgia game was penalties.
Yep. Hopefully he can find a way to put it back together, and maybe App State will be a get right game for him. We'll see.
Hopefully. I saw this meme on Twitter after the game on Saturday that was, the Office meme format where it's Pam and she's like, corporate needs you to find the difference between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture. And it was a picture of Joe Nada and Adam Randall, which I thought was pretty funny.
Might not be wrong there.
Fact or fiction?
All right, fact or fiction? Fact or fiction, Clemson's offensive line was the best position unit versus Georgia this past week.
I am going big fiction here because the defensive line was the best. Not to say I wasn't impressed with the offensive line, and if you're taking performance versus expectations, I'd agree that it was the offensive line. But just straight, who was the best? I think it's got to be defensive line. You got Peter Woods, TJ Parker made an impact, Devontae Capehart I've already mentioned. Even Trey Williams got in there and made a couple plays in the interior defensive line. So I'm going fiction on that one.
I agree with you there. I'm going to go fiction as well. The defensive line for many years has been the heart and soul of this defense and what's helped keep Clemson in games.
Before we move on to the next thing, I wanted to also say that, shouting out the offensive line, that I think they only gave up one sack all game. And it was in the second half and in a pass situation, like 3rd and long or 2nd and long. So that's really impressive, especially against a really talented Georgia front seven.
Absolutely. I think there was a second sack, but they credited that one to Cade. I think he held on to the ball too long. Fact or fiction, if Clemson's offensive struggles continue against App State this Saturday night, fans become restless and begin booing. I did hear some boo birds in Florida State's game last night.
Oh, yeah. I'm like, that's not surprising, but I'm going fiction here. We just played the best team in the country. Like, and we hung around with them for a full first half, a little bit of the second half too. But they just made us look average in the second half. So I think if you're a Clemson fan who wanted better offensive production than what we got, your expectations were just too high.
I agree with what you just said, but that doesn't mean that fans, short for fanatical, are going to feel this way when Cade goes 3 and out on the first offensive drive Saturday night, especially if they've been tailgating all day. So I feel like if it goes similarly, I think we could hear some boo birds. Do I think it's justified? Absolutely not. Not a big fan of necessarily booing your team. I mentioned Florida State there a minute ago. We got to talk about this guy who posted last week on Twitter that if Florida State loses to Boston College, he's going to eat a red Solo cup full of poop with a spoon. He has since deleted his Twitter account. Hey, that sounds terrible, but dude, if you offer that up, you got to follow through with it.
I mean, I think people would be happy if he just did a spoonful.
Yeah. Yeah, or in this day and age, if you're doing a video, you can make something of pudding or something to look at least somewhat close and fake it. Because that's what I would do. But here we go. Fact or fiction, which I changed to over-under. Over-under 3.5 national pundits tweet about Clemson's fans storming the field this Saturday in their home opener.
I said over, but only because we will be one of them.
I like how you consider us national pundits.
Exactly. Hey, we covered all college football.
Yeah. Yeah, I always look forward to this first home game of the year, especially when it's of a non-Power 5 team and they just catch a glimpse of Clemson fans storming the field. Like, why is Clemson storming the field after beating South Carolina State? I will be firing that tweet off because it does get a rise out of people. We do have a very small percentage of our followers on Twitter who look for that tweet every week and just hang out in the comments waiting for people to freak out. Then so we were talking about Florida State earlier a couple of years ago on this tweet. DJ's dad got in on it and was trying to correct us and tell us that this is what happens every week at Clemson. So,
I wouldn't. Big Dave isn't necessarily somebody you want to be right now. I think I heard that he was like sending threats to people on Twitter Spaces last night.
Yeah, well, I think that was from over the summer, but it resurfaced this week. Oh, yeah, but he was calling people out, telling people to meet him at the game. He's going to fight them and all kinds of stuff. I feel bad for DJ. He seems like a good dude, and his dad seems like he causes a lot more problems than he does being the supportive father.
Maybe. I think I still kind of like Big Dave, but he can run his mouth a little bit.
Yeah.
Weekly picks.
All right. Shall we review week 1 of our Pick'em contest? It went pretty well for the two of us.
Yeah, it went very well, and some interesting close calls here. I'll start off. My favorite underdog and under all hit. UNC, Minnesota was my favorite. UNC was a 1.5 point favorite. Minnesota missed a game-winning field goal as time expired to win by 1. They missed, and UNC wins by 2. My bet hits. I also we talked about it earlier this episode, but the Vanderbilt, Virginia Tech, I wasn't expecting Vanderbilt to win that game at all. 13.5 was just big. They ended up covering. And then under, I think a lot of us saw the writing on the wall for this one, but luckily, Clemson was able to hold Georgia under 48.5 and hit that one also. I am upset, though, that my over did not hit. I picked Nevada versus Troy, and if you remember, I kind of pulled this pick out of my ass. The line for that one was 54.5. Final score was 28-26, total of 54. Troy scored with like 16 seconds left, and obviously they had to go for 2 in order to tie the game and potentially force overtime, but they did not get the 2-point conversion. But if they were into the betting lines, they probably could have kicked the extra point there and hit the over, and I would have went undefeated. Well, they would have lost by 1, but I would have won my bet.
Yeah. That was a bad beat right there. Both of us missed on our over. I had Colorado State, Texas. I expected Colorado State to at least put up a touchdown at some point, but Texas won 52-0. The over-under was at 60.5. My under barely hit with Iowa, Illinois State. Over-under was 40.5. Iowa wins 40-0. Look at that offense out of the Hawkeyes. And then I felt confident about these other two. My favorite, Miami -2.5 at Florida, and my underdog, Notre Dame +3 on the road at Texas A&M. Both were really fun games to watch. So Matthew and I finished week 1 tied 3-3. So if you want to make some money, just follow along with our picks each week. Speaking of, let's take a look at our picks this week. I will say, hand up, I forgot to do my picks right before we were going to record yesterday. I just quickly hopped on the ESPN app and just looked at them really fast. And then I was like, when we ended up postponing till today, I was like, I'm going to go back and look at my picks and make sure they're good and I like them. Forgot to do that. So I'm stuck with what I did within a 3-minute search the other day. So we'll see how this week goes.
I actually did a very similar thing and made my picks pretty quick yesterday. I reviewed them today, and there was one that I wasn't feeling, but I left it because I must have had some kind of feeling going while I was making the pick. So starting off with my favorite, I am going to, I don't know what the state, like what their nickname is, but the Iowa State game. Iowa's a 3-point favorite right now after their showing last week with the electric offense. I like Iowa winning that one by more than a field goal.
All right. I am going to the ACC, one of the premier teams in this league right now. Georgia Tech -3 points on the road at Syracuse. They got a big win under their belt, starting 2-0, travel to Syracuse, New York. I think Georgia Tech covers this one easily.
That's interesting. I was looking at this game a lot, but Syracuse kind of scares me with Kyle McCord. He had a really good week 1, so I want to see more out of them before I pick them. This was one I could just kind of threw out for fun this week. This is my one I would give a disclaimer to if you're running bets on us. I went underdog Northern Illinois +29.5 versus Notre Dame. I meant to say this when we talked about Notre Dame, Texas A&M earlier, but it was a great win for Notre Dame, but I'm not sure how great either of those teams are. The win looks good right now, but will it look the same at the end of the season? So we got to find out what Notre Dame is more about.
Like we talked about last week, Notre Dame has a great path to the 5th seed in the college football playoff. And this year, they don't have a really tough schedule. So if they can win out, they'll be in a good position. But yeah, 29.5 is a lot of points. For my underdog, Michigan State, a 9.5-point dog on the road to Maryland. I picked this one really quick. 9.5, Michigan State. I don't know. Could be a terrible pick. We'll see.
Yeah, I didn't watch the Michigan State game this past weekend, so I'm not sure what they're working with this year. My over, nice. I went with Duke versus Northwestern. That's right now plus or minus 39.5, which I felt like was pretty low. Duke has Malik Murphy now. I don't know if you got to see any of their games week 1. But Malik Murphy's looking pretty good, so I like that to go over 40.
I watched that game, and now I can't remember who they played. Who did Duke play that first game?
It was a small North Carolina school,
Oh, it was Elon, wasn't it?
Elon or Eastern Carolina or Western Carolina, one of those.
It was Western Carolina.
Yeah.
It was Western Carolina. For my over, I am going with Baylor, Utah, over 53.5. Again, don't really have much of a reasoning here.
I like that, though. That's a Big 12, and the Big 12 has looked like they're back to their old ways of having no defense. And then finishing it off with my under, I'm going Georgia Tech, Syracuse. That plus or minus when I picked it was at 59.5. And Georgia Tech held Florida State to, I think 21 points when they played in week 0. And although I think Syracuse's offense is going to look pretty good, but I think Georgia Tech is just a pretty well-rounded team.
I'm kind of piggybacking off of your favorite pick, and I think this is where going with Iowa unders is going to bite me in the butt. But Iowa State under 35.5 this week.
Interesting.
I'm gonna ride this Iowa train until it starts to bite me for unders. 35.5 is a low number.
That's very low, but it could happen. If our favorites and unders are switched, we pick the same game for both.
Yeah.
So not that much football for us to watch for our homework this weekend, but
no. Your North Carolina Minnesota pick. I ordinarily would not root for your pick, but I got that line at UNC -2, and I was rooting for that field goal, so I'd at least get a push and get my money back. So I was thankful that North Carolina made that field goal there. Otherwise, I would have been rooting for him to miss it. All right, let's look ahead to Appalachian State and Clemson. Overall, Clemson leads the series 5-0 all time. Last meeting was in September 12th, 2015. Clemson won that game 41-10. Tigers were undefeated, so there's a 5-game streak there. The opening line I hadn't checked since I did notice today. Line opened at 16.5 in favor of Clemson. I did see on ESPN today that it's up to 17.5. But that number was from FanDuel on Sunday, and don't know if the over-under has changed, but it's 51.5 last I checked. I wrote my notes before Ross Taylor put this out there, which means I don't have really many notes for Appalachian State, Clemson. But all-time in the 5 meetings, Clemson has outscored App State 186-29. Granted, this iteration of Appalachian State that we do know, the one that likes to take down Power 5 opponents, only one of those games happened within the time frame of the Appalachian State we know now. A lot of these were in the 90s and that kind of thing. So initial thoughts on this App State matchup, Matthew?
We've been talking about it for the off season, and by we I mean Clemson fans, that this is definitely a trap game for Clemson, and we have a lot to clean up after the Georgia game. But I think as long as our players don't put too much stock into that Georgia game and we're ready to move forward, because all of the season goals except for win the opener are still ahead of us, especially with 12-team playoffs. You still got a great chance of making it to the ACC championship. But you got to have a tune-up game here and not fall victim to that App State curse that they seem to bring upon people. So I think it's just got to be a really clean game. I would expect a pretty close game here, honestly. I think 17.5 is a little much.
I'm going to be contrarian here. I think Clemson covers that spread. I think you proved your defense can hold up for a half against the best team in the country. And I'm not really worried about the defense against Appalachian State next week. If you can find a way to get the ball in your playmakers' hands on the offensive side of the ball, you've seen your improvement with the offensive line. First home game, night game, you know that you got a bye week immediately following before your NC State game. There's no excuse not to put your body on the line, go all out. And I think we're probably going to see a fired-up Clemson team. So didn't want to go with it for my official favorite pick, but I'm going to say Tigers cover the spread this weekend against Appalachian State at home.
I like that, and I hope you're right. I think we're going to see a heavy dose of Phil Maffa in this game, and like you said, with the improved offensive line, they had a great showing against a really good Georgia team. I think right now all they have to do is go prove it to themselves that that game was a fluke and that Georgia is the best team in the country, but Clemson is still one of the best teams. So I think they're going to try and go out and dominate on the ground, and hopefully that opens up Cade, helps him relax and hit some open throws.
Yeah. One thing I will say, we did talk about Cade and had some nice things to say about him. The guy that was sitting next to me in the press conference last week, during one of the
guy that was asleep?
No, that was in the press conference waiting on that. But I will say, to that guy's credit, did I tweet that out? Did I post
No,
it
I think
on
you
Twitter?
just texted it to us.
Anyways, Dabo took a very long time to get this post-game press conference, to the point where I started hearing a noise, and I look over, and the sound guy sitting next to me is drooped over, just snoring. Someone has to wake him up. But I forget the guy's name that sat next to me in the press box. But anyways, he he, with his binoculars, from the time Cade walked off the field in between going like 3 and out one drive to the time that he went back out the next drive, he had his binoculars just sat there locked in on Cade, and he said he was cool, calm, collected, didn't seem like the overwhelmed, the nervous, anxious Cade that we saw a lot of times last season. He was conversing back and forth, some of the backups, looking at the tablet, talking through things, and that kind of thing. So I think I was worried about this game before it ever happened, of whatever confidence Cade did have getting ruined, kind of like what happened with DJ when they played Georgia a few years ago. But I don't think we have that situation with Cade, so I look for him to have a good game this week. I'm very optimistic and don't think that it is all as bad as what it seems. The sky is not falling. I think we do have a good team on our hands. We just got to work some things out.
Yeah, I agree, and I like that outlook. I think I think you're right about Cade. Like, he had a much better showing against Georgia than DJ did in that game, where they both threw a pick, but DJ's pick was the only touchdown in that game. Cade's wasn't all entirely his fault. You can't expect every cornerback to, be Odell Beckham Jr.
Yeah. So, any final thoughts before we wrap up the episode?
I don't. I mean, I think I've said all I need to say about this App State game. I mean, they're going to be a talented team, and they're going to come in and try to upset Clemson, but you've given me a little bit more confidence. I think the offensive line is going to dominate that line of scrimmage, and Clemson's going to move the ball pretty seamlessly.
I did want to throw out one little tidbit here that many Clemson fans may have forgotten. There's a little bit of a crossover connection here. Garrett Riley, former offensive position coach at App State. So there's a little bit of familiarity there. The head coach at App State, him and his staff has come to Clemson in the summers and off seasons to work with Clemson staff to kind of learn and do that kind of stuff. So that'll be kind of interesting. But one final thing on the Georgia game, I will say, very thankful for the press box, having access to the stadium 3 hours prior to the game. So I got in before any fans were there. And because of Dabo's press conference, I left after all the fans were gone. So I did avoid barking grown adults, at least seeing them. While we were waiting in Dabo's press conference, there was it sounded like a pack of dogs walking out, and you could hear it clear as day in Dabo's press conference. It was quite funny, but I avoided the Georgia fans.
I'm glad. I'm happy for you, and you probably avoided a lot of traffic too.
I still got stuck in traffic. One thing I did not avoid, Dragon Con in downtown Atlanta. I don't know what kind of people come to this thing. Every turn I made, so my directions took me to the wrong place when I was supposed to go to the garage. And so I ended up downtown. And every turn I made, there was just hundreds of people dressed up as freaking ghouls and goblins standing on the side of the road like there was a parade about to come through. Every time I tried to turn, I couldn't, because people were crossing the road dressed as Shrek and Fiona. I don't know what this Dragon Con is, but I was not particularly a fan.
I think there's actually a good amount of overlap in like Georgia fans who like barking and pretending they're a dog, and then these people who are going to Dragon Con and dressing up and
maybe that's how this game came about and got scheduled on this weekend.
Yeah, maybe they like Dragon Con scheduled it then because they knew that they were going to have a lot of supporters in town.
some furry crossover.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, that is episode 2, and that is Furry Talk here on the College Football Show. Appreciate you all for joining us each week. Again, like, subscribe, follow us at Nachos_Analysis on Twitter. I'm trying to be better about remembering to post as much on Instagram. I learned the schedule feature, so now I can schedule Instagram posts. So appreciate y'all listening to us, and join us next week, and we'll talk some ball. Peace.
Peace.